if you had to summarize your strategy when it comes from like access standpoint and how you hunt, how would you go about describing your hunting style for when it comes to feed trees?
Okay, so mainly it's a lot of scouting to find the hot tree of the day or of the week, because they only, you know, well, they'll start dropping those green acorns at first. So it's just finding that best one that there's a lot of sign on. Access is very important. Slipping in, slipping out. We have one spot that there's a creek bank that's probably 10 to 12 feet high, and when you walk up the creek to get past a lot of area where deer might be already feeding in the mornings, to get past that to get to the tree you need to be in. And we've killed 2 bucks in this one spot that we definitely probably would have walked by if we had not been down in the creek and walking up the creek. And 30 minutes after daylight, here they come back from the area we'd come from. So,
Andrew, did you catch that?
I think so.
Hunting mornings for feed
oh,
trees.
most of my big deer were killed in the mornings on feed trees.
Oh, so that's very
another
different.
thing I was going to get to.
Yeah, that's super different.
Yep.
You say that's different, but for Southern guys, I really don't think it is.
Yeah, but if you were to analyze a lot of our feed tree conversations in the past, like the guys come to mind, like especially like Jonathan Moreland, and then Richard Fott, a lot of their success was like that midday afternoon time period and kind of scouting for those trees in the morning.
Yeah, definitely. But most of the guys outside of them are they hunt in the morning. Because like the whole don't hunt in the morning thing, I feel like is more of a Midwestern thing.
So I have actually scouted my way in and found a feed tree in the dark, climbed up and killed maybe my biggest or second biggest in South Carolina, doing that like an hour after daylight. There were 3 or 4 small bucks that came in first, and of course I was just waiting on a big one. And yeah, I knew the area though. Knew I'd hunted that little patch before. So it was, one of the first or second places I checked that morning on the way in. I was like, yeah, that's where I need to be.
Well, while we're on the conversation, let's stick on this morning hunting because this is something that, again, I think in general media, like Andrew, that is a good point. Like we have had other guys on and just know other guys that hunt feed trees that do have success in the mornings, like Scott Seals, great example. But when you're talking about morning hunting, is that something that you're specifically going to areas that you have previously scouted? You're not walking to a new area on a morning hunt, and you're kind of working your way back to trees that you have found in the past? And
most of the time, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And what specific setup, if you're talking about like hunting morning for feed trees and your access and everything, how are you working on getting into an area? And why do some areas look at, maybe in your perspective, as more of a morning spot for feed trees versus maybe afternoon spots?
Yeah, so I have hunted some tree, so sometimes it's hard to figure that out, and sometimes you have to hunt and figure it out. We have areas where you can go hunt in the evening and see 1 or 2 deer, maybe never see a buck, and then the next morning, well, I'll just go back and tell the whole story. So hunted this area, saw 10 bucks one morning, 10 rack bucks, anything, something bigger than like a 6, 8 point. Passed them all up. Hunted that evening, saw like 2 deer. Like, all right, well, what's going on? Next morning, I killed a nice buck. The next week, my buddy killed a nice buck 200 yards from there, and then that next week, I killed another big one. So it's one of those things where we just don't even go evenings anymore because we've done the sits. And it doesn't look any different than anywhere else. There's a pine thicket on one top, a pine thicket on the other, and it's really just an SMZ between them, which is a term that I didn't learn until I started listening to you guys.
What'd you call it before?
Hardwood draw, but well, I mean, there's different, I don't know, probably just hardwoods.
Yeah.
Didn't really distinguish between different types,
Yeah.
But before we get too off in the weeds here, because we're going really fast.
Yeah.
How did you grow up doing this? Like, how did you learn how to do it? And I just want to caveat by saying that, like, when I was growing up, everyone's like, oh, you go find a white oak dropping, like that's ice cream to a deer. I didn't actually know anyone who did it, though, because everyone I grew up around was gun hunters. And I guess you can do it in our gun season, which starts the Saturday before Thanksgiving in Alabama. But it's really a bow season thing specifically for a lot of people. And I just didn't know anybody who did that. And when I started bow hunting and tried to go out and find some feed trees, I'm like, oh, wow, I don't know what I'm doing, like, at all. And it didn't work for me for a really long time. So how did you get started with it?
So I got started probably similar to the way you did. People say that, and you go hunt, and there's acorns everywhere. It's like, well, but that's the tree the deer aren't eating if they're everywhere. So I think that's probably
well, that's a good point. We're coming back to that.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that probably hangs people up. They're like, I hear people talk about it all the time. Oh, hunting this area, there's acorns raining everywhere. They're all over the ground. It's like, that's not necessarily a good thing if they're on the ground. They haven't been eaten yet. So yeah, I grew up doing that. We would see deer. We had some good spots. We would see deer. But once I got into college, started hunting more with my buddy whose dad had been hunting feed trees a lot longer than I had, and it was more about specific targeting that specific tree. So it was kind of a learning curve. There was a lot of time in there. We were just climbing up in hardwoods where there was acorns and hoping one walked by. But once you start finding those specific hot trees, it changes a lot. It's a lot more consistent. I've taken people before, and I tell them before we go, it's like there's a 90% chance you're going to get a shot at a deer this evening. That might not be a buck. It might be two does might come in, but there's like 2 weeks in October in South Carolina, Georgia, where white oaks are perfect, and yeah, it's every evening, every morning there'll be a deer there pretty much.
Yeah, we're going to get into probably the habitat and terrain aspect of this later, but to start out, I really want to talk more about the sign reading.
Okay.
Because it's so you have to be good at reading sign and understand what you're looking at. You brought up an excellent point, is like if you walk beneath this oak tree and there's so many acorns underneath it that you're like, I'm gonna fall and sprain my ankle. Yeah, like you slipping on all of them.
Yeah, that's not good.
Like in the past, man, I'd be walking up, I'd be like, look at all this.
Yeah.
This is where we're hunting tonight, and then never see anything.
Yeah,
You know,
some of the best trees I've hunted, you walk under and you're trying to find them, but you get there, it's all mulched up. So, same thing with droppings. Droppings is one of those things. It's like they can be everywhere, or it might, and I think it might have to do with if it's the trees that the deer go to first, or if they've been milling around for a while and maybe they don't leave as many droppings. But I've killed a lot of deer on tore up white oaks that have hardly any droppings under them. So yeah, reading the signs big. Look for the mulched up. It doesn't look like turkey scratching. It might look like hogs, but you can kind of see the individual prints. The leaves are turned over. If it's rained within the last day or two, of course, that makes it to where all that old sign's washed away, but you can see the leaves mulched up, broken up. Looking for the acorn caps on the ground, notched caps, or just kind of broken up acorns that the hole is still there from where they've busted it open.
talk about the notched cap thing.
Well, I just usually look for caps in general. I've heard about the notched cap thing. A lot of times, though, squirrels will cut acorns out, so they might have messed with it. That's another thing to look for when you're trying to find a tree, is look for one that's dropping or look for one that squirrels are up in cutting out. So the notched cap thing's new to me. Or it's not new to me, but it's something that I've looked at in the past. And
It's just like there'll be a little cap, and there's like literally just a little notch taken out of it. Like you got your fingernail and just like pinched a little part of it off.
Yeah, I just look for the caps in general.
Okay.
All right, so you were talking about when it rains, it washes away a lot of the sign. Can you explain what you mean by that?
It just means like the leaves that were mulched up or lofted up are no longer don't look like that. You walk under a feed tree that yesterday was like mutilated, and you go back after it's rained, it just looks different. It was kind of laid down instead of being. It's not necessarily like the droppings are washed away or the caps are washed away. It's more just the mulched leaves are kind of harder to tell that there's been deer there. But you go like 2 hours after rain and it looks fresh, you're like, oh, they were just in here. So that can be a good indicator that they've been there recently.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you rake something up in your yard.
Yeah.
You know what it looks like. That's the easiest example. It's like what it looks like right then versus what it looks like in 2 days.
Yeah.
You know, like the leaves settle back down a little bit, and in the really fresh sign, the underside of the leaves are still wet and whatnot. When you see that, you're like, oh yeah.
It's a hard thing to just explain. Hopefully we get a chance this fall to hunt together, and I can. Well, I'm sure you've seen it, but sometimes you'll be walking with somebody that kind of thinks they know what they're looking for, and they walk right past a tree and they don't notice it. But you really get to looking at the details, so you can find the trees that, and it might be a tree that there's not 4 or 5 does coming to every day. It might be a tree that you just know there's some buck sign around. This tree's being fed on. Those are sometimes some good trees.
Yeah, another thing that you hear a lot, especially in pine country, whether it be Alabama, Georgia, or South Carolina, is we'll interview the guys like Richard from Arkansas or Jonathan who hunt these big river bottoms, and they're like feed tree specialists. Is what they do. And sometimes we'll put out those episodes and we'll have people comment on them or whatever, and they'll be like, well, that just doesn't work here. Like, you just don't find that here. Right. And I used to think that too about the area, because some of the people I know, and I hunt the same places as them, and I used to think it too. And I was telling Jacob this the other day. I'm like, actually, it was just me not walking enough. Like I straight up just was not scouting enough.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just expect to walk into a 5-acre patch of hardwoods and there be a feed tree there. That's just not how it works. I mean, there's a lot of, and it's timing too. Of course, the red oaks usually start first where we are, and then the white oaks. Later season, you might have some water oaks or something like that. But early season, it's going to be red oaks, and then transitioning to my favorite period, which is white oaks, which is usually late October for us.
Yeah, I mean, would it be safe to say that like anywhere that feed trees exist, anywhere that like acorn producing oaks are, you can find a hot feed tree and hunt it?
You could, yeah.
I mean, because I don't see a reason why there one area just like you couldn't hunt feed trees in one area if they exist there.
No, if they exist there, unless it's the only reason would be if there's just too many, and yeah, the deer feeding on them, but they have 100 options this week instead of 10 on a year when there's not many. So
yeah,
it would be harder to narrow them down.
So in pine country, it ought to be even better.
Yeah,
because all you got is SMZs.
SMZs, yeah.